You're commuting home with Katz and Cosby. Now, here's John Katzimatidis and Rita Cosby on 77 WABC.
Let's take the congressman is calling.
Yeah, let's go to him.
Maybe he knows Colorado is close to him.
Yeah, let's find out. Well, he's from Florida, so, you know.
Oh, yeah, that's a little further away.
It's a little further away, I was going to say. Let's go to Congressman Mike Waltz.
The smoke didn't go all the way to...
Yeah, it didn't go all the way to you. Before we get to, of course, the interview, let me ask you, Congressman Waltz, first of all, we're thrilled to have you here. And by the way, congrats. You got a new book coming out too, which is really awesome in October. And it's going to be sort of the lessons, of course, that you learned from being a Green Beret. And the book is Hard Truths. So let's get to the hard truth, I guess, if we could, Congressman, about Aurora. You've got the Democratic governor there saying it didn't happen. It's imagination. It seems like it's sort of the spin about crime. And we see what's happening with our own two eyes at those apartment buildings. They are armed Venezuelan cartel gangs.
Yeah, here's the hard truth that the Democrats just don't want to acknowledge. These aren't the old kind of street gangs of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. These are transnational cartels with ties to the Chinese, ties to the Russians, billions at their disposal. They currently control about 30% of Mexico. The Mexican army can't even take them on. They shoot down Mexican Air Force aircraft with heavy machine guns and armored vehicles. Here's the dangerous truth is that once they take over a space, first the law enforcement can't handle them, but then they begin buying off judges, buying off local officials, intimidating electeds and others, and literally become a little mini Venezuela or ungoverned parts of Mexico, Sinaloa, Jalisco, Medellin from back in the 80s. We have to nip this cancer in the bud, and President Trump is absolutely right. And I've introduced the legislation to use military resources to back up law enforcement.
You need it. You need
drones, offensive cyber. You absolutely need it. These guys are armed to the teeth. They're not shooting off a little .38 revolver. And again, the Venezuelan military, Mexican army can't even take them on.
And aren't they thriving, Congressman, because of the funds they take from the huge millions of people who are crossing the border illegally? Isn't that one of their major funding sources now?
And fentanyl.
From human trafficking, from fentanyl, from all types of other drugs. You name the stolen car rings, you name it. They are making billions and billions. And again, this is transnational, coordinating with Russian mafia, coordinating with Chinese.
But if there's not an open border, they wouldn't be getting those funds. Isn't that right?
Oh, you're damn straight. I mean, this is basically the ungoverned spaces of Mexico and Central America. I mean, we had gangs taking over government buildings in Ecuador, all spreading north, and the Democrats are just turning a blind eye because it fits their progressive narrative. And they're willing to accept this to allow the millions of others to come in that's going to transform this country.
Congressman Mike Waltz, last night we were talking about the conversation, and to me, I thought she got such a softball interview, and I thought a lot of times Kamala Harris looked like deer in the headlights. And there was a question about border, and she keeps going back to, Trump didn't want to pass this bill. And then she said, I would enforce the laws at the border. What did you make when you heard her saying those things last night, which are in direct contrast to what she has said in the past?
Well, it's just a joke. There is an entire montage, years worth, voluminous interviews, radio, her on the media, laughing at the border wall, calling it Trump's vanity project, saying that it was, the entire migration issue was completely made up, alluding that he and Republicans are racist. She has not, will not enforce the border or our immigration laws. She is all for amnesty, and we keep replaying the clip, and we should, when she was asked during the 2020 primary race who believes that they should all have government-provided health care. And every one of them, including Kamala, she was one of the first, raised their hand. And every time I talk to a homeless veteran, every time I talk to a teacher whose classroom's too crowded, every time I see infrastructure that's overtaxed, we literally cannot afford to feed and house the entire world. But the Democrats would like to have us try. And in between there, you have these cartels that are literally taking over. First, it's going to be whole apartment buildings. Then it's going to be neighborhoods. Then it's going to be completely ungoverned spaces that law enforcement can no longer handle. That cancer is spreading. We've got to nip it in the bud right now.
You know, Congressman Mike Waltz, you were a Green Beret. And by the way, I love, again, that your book is Hard Truth, Think and Lead Like a Green Beret, coming out in October. We got to get you on to talk about it when it comes out, Congressman. What did you think when you saw Tim Walz being asked about the claims that he inflated his background? And then he used the answer, well, my wife says I need to work on my grammar. As a military guy, what did you think?
Yeah, I re-listened to the tape, watched the video. His grammar was just fine when he said, I carried a weapon of war in a war, when he said over and over and over again that he retired as a command sergeant major, when he stamped it into his military challenge coin. And then the really insidious part is when he let literally decades worth of journalists and other officials describe him as a combat veteran, having served in Afghanistan and Iraq, and he just smiled and nodded along, let it be implied, never corrected a single one of them. And that may sound like, okay, apples to oranges to a lot of people. That's a big damn deal to every veteran out there. And that is not an attack on his service. I'm so sick of that kind of retort from the Democrats. I celebrate his years in the National Guard. He should too, and stop lying about it. Because if you can't trust him on the basics of describing a service, then how are you going to trust him on anything else? It really goes to a character issue and a character flaw that he apparently has.
Congressman, I want to have John repeat something. You had an interesting point about Afghanistan, about the withdrawal of Afghanistan, how all of that sort of led.
Well, I was on with Greg Kelly before, and I said President Biden went to Afghanistan, overruled his generals. His general says we can't pull out like this. And President Biden says, no, we're pulling out. And I said, if he didn't pull out like that, number one, Putin would have never gone into the Ukraine. 500,000 people died in the Ukraine and Russia because of what President Biden has did. He has to have 500,000 deaths on his shoulders, because if he didn't do that in Afghanistan, then Ukraine would have never happened. And the other thing is, all the Democrats that love women's rights. All the women in Afghanistan are now slaves. They can't get an education. They have to wear masks, and the women are slaves. And all the environmentalists in the world, the Red Sea has that boat that the Houthis are following the orders of Iran, and they quasi sank it, and it's the crude oil 4 times the size of Exxon Valdez.
That's right.
It's going into the Red Sea, and where are all the environmentalists saying this is wrong? So where are the environmentalists? Where are the women's rights groups? I mean, enough is enough. And 500,000 people died in the Ukraine and in Russia. I respect the Russian lives, and I respect the Ukrainian lives.
And Harris was the last one in the room when Biden decided he would pull out, despite all the staff, despite all the military.
Enough is enough.
Yeah, that's it.
Absolutely.
And
your reaction, Congressman, your reaction.
Well, it's not only the 13 Gold Star families that and those loved ones that are, the blood is on their hands. It's our Afghan allies that the Taliban is hunting down and torturing right now as we speak. It's all of the Ukrainians. And I would take it a step further. October 7th certainly wouldn't have happened under Trump's watch, but it happened under Biden. Right. And Afghanistan was the original sin that sent that message of weakness to every dictator around the world to say, get what you can while you can, because there is weakness in this White House.
We had Gordon Chang on, and the Chinese are circling Philippines. Okay?
right.
I mean, if something happens to the Philippines, it's all downhill. What did Secretary Gates say originally about President Biden? What did Secretary Gates say about President Biden? And what did President Obama say about Secretary Vice President Biden?
I can tell you, John, I worked for Secretary Gates, and he said Joe Biden's been wrong on every single issue for the last 3 decades, and Barack Obama, don't underestimate Joe Biden's ability to F it up. But I want to foot stomp your point on women's rights. You're absolutely right. It's not only a generation of women who tasted freedom in Afghanistan and now literally can't leave their home. It's the 40% of women that are trafficked over our border, or the 40% of women that come over our border are sexually assaulted and sold into trafficking. There are rape tents in the Darien Gap as a price of passage for the cartels, but it's also the Uyghur women in China that are have a mass rape and
the environmentalists and the women's rights groups.
That's right.
The women's rights groups, the environmentalists are not doing crap.